So you'll have parables are often another kind of therapeutic story. Oftentimes you can answer a question. Now there's the question of how we answer scientific questions of our children is another one that's difficult for a lot of parents to deal with. They don't want to not tell their children the facts about the world around them, but oftentimes these facts can be just so confusing that the child just shuts down. And here's an example. A mother and a child are sitting in the backyard at sunset, and the sun is quite red as it's setting. The child says, "Mommy, why does the sun turn red when it sets?" And mother says, "Well, dear, that's because we're seeing it through more layers of atmosphere than earlier in the day. Particles of dust and molecules of water float in the air, and they alter the range of the spectrum that's visible to us." You remember what a molecule is, don't you, dear? You know, that child is probably gone, or at least in her imagination anyway. Now, this is, the answer to this question is treated in a story in the book, Why the Setting Sun Turns Red, and that's the name of the story, and I'll tell you that one. Laura and her mother were taking the clothes in off the line one sunny summer afternoon, just as the sun set. And Laura said, "Mommy, the sun is all red. How come the setting sun turns red when it's bright yellow all the rest of the day?" So Mother said, "Well, let's get the clothes in off the line and get them all in the basket, and then we'll sit down on the steps and we'll watch the sunset, and I'll tell you why." So they finished gathering up the clothes, folded them all into a neat pile in the laundry basket. They smelled so sweet. And then they sat down on the steps to watch the sunset. And Mother said, "You know, all day, little sun is moving across the sky, dressed up in his bright yellow sunsuit. And all around him, the bright blue sky, Mother Sky, watches over him in her bright blue gown. And all of the children who are playing are watching him and enjoying his play. And they know that even when he goes behind a fluffy cloud, that he'll come back out again and join them in their play. But when afternoon comes, late afternoon comes, and it's time for it to be dark, the little son gets taken by his mother, dressed up in his red flannel pajamas, and she takes a fluffy white cloud and washes his face, cleans him all up, and lays him down to sleep behind a green hill in a nice soft space. And then she gets dressed up in her dark blue nightgown and watches over him all night as he sleeps. And now it's time for you to put on your red flannel pajamas and get ready. Now that story, in a very imaginative way, tells the child an answer that it's very fanciful, but that's what a child that age can deal with. And telling them about molecules and refraction is useless. So it's that kind of story that can be really, really helpful in answering children's questions. When you're telling a story to young children, and even to older children, usually you tell it quite simply. You try to use really good descriptive language wherever you can. You can change your voice a little bit, but you don't have to get terribly dramatic in your storytelling. Particularly with small children, you don't want to deepen your voice to the point of frightening them. So you want the story to be simple and simply told. If you're learning a story, you want to run the scenes by as you read the story to start with. Imagine what's happening. Imagine the series of events that take place in your mind. And then go back and describe what it is that you're seeing in your mind's eye as you have imagined the story. If you're describing something that you are seeing in your own mind's eye, your children will be better able to construct a vision and an imagination of the scene as it's unfolding in the story. So it's not a matter of memorizing words when you learn the story. It's a matter of imagining a series of pictures and then describing those pictures to your child. Now, there are other ways of telling stories too, and in the beginning, when you're first learning to tell stories, it sometimes is helpful to have something in your hand. You can make something like this. This is just a little scene for the 3 billy goats gruff, and there are slits cut in it, and the characters are on craft sticks or coffee stirrers, and they can be fitted into the slots and slid across to where they're going. And then, in this case, cross over the bridge and get to the other side. And it gives you something to help you remember the story because you're handling something. Puppets are in the same way, can be helpful. So I'm going to give you a little puppet show. Once upon a time, there was a prince who lived in a castle that was shrouded in mist. Now he was quite lonely because he had no brothers or sisters, and he was grown up. He lived in the castle with his father, the king, who was gone most of the time, and his mother, the queen. And he said one day, I think I would like to find a real princess and marry her. So he spoke to his mother, the queen, and they came up with a plan. He wanted to be sure that the woman he married was a real princess. And so his mother suggested that they get a bed with 20 mattresses, and they put a little green pea underneath the mattress. And they would invite various princesses to come and take the test of sleeping in this bed with the 20 mattresses. And so that's what they did. And the queen went to her chamber. Now the prince, let it be known, all his heralds went all over the kingdom, and let it be known that he was looking for a real princess to marry. And pretty soon, princesses started knocking on the door. The first princess who came presented herself, and she said, I am a real princess. And the prince said, well, come on in, and the test is that you will sleep in our bed here with the 20 mattresses. And we'll see if you're a real princess. So the princess went to sleep on the 20 mattresses, and the prince went away. In the morning, he came back, and he said, good morning, princess. Did you sleep well? The princess sat up, and she said, why, I slept wonderfully well. This was the most comfortable bed that I have ever slept in. The prince said, be off with you. You're not a real princess. And so she went away. Next, there was another knock on the door. And another princess came. She said, I am a princess. And the prince said, well, come on in and take the test. You need to sleep overnight in our bed with the 20 mattresses. And so she went to sleep in the bed with the 20 mattresses, and the prince went away. In the morning, he came back and he said, "Good morning, Princess. Did you sleep well?" The princess sat up and she said, "Why, yes, I slept wonderfully well. I have never slept in such a comfortable bed." And the prince said, "Be off with you. You're not a real princess." Well, that night, a terrible storm came up. The thunder crashed and the lightning flashed, and in the midst of all this stormy weather and all of this noise and commotion, the prince heard a knock on the door. When he went to answer the door, there was a bedraggled young lady, all soaking wet. And he said, "Oh, you may come in out of the rain. Come in and sleep. We have this bed here." One of the questions was, why do we tell Grimm's fairy tales? And the main reason that there's a focus on Grimm's fairy tales is that they're German fairy tales and Steiner spoke German, so that's why. But there's nothing wrong with telling English fairy tales or Russian fairy tales or Thai fairy tales or you name it. Every culture has fairy tales. And most of them, if you get a good edition, have not been tampered with and are archetypal stories that are worth telling. So, feel free to tell other fairy tales besides just Grimm. I also want to repeat once again that in all of these cultures, many of the fairy tales are not meant for children. Fairy tales are not just for children in these ancient cultures. They were the archetypal, dreamlike stories that were used for everyone. And many of them were for adults only, and were only told after the children had fallen asleep around the fire. They had realization that these stories were not for children. So just don't tell a story that offends you. Because if it offends you, your child is going to know that it's an offensive story, even though it might not be offensive to someone else. You really need to run it through your own filters before you tell it. And your opinions of stories may change over time. And for different children, one of your children may not be okay to tell a particular story to them, whereas another one, it is. Follow your instincts, follow your feelings where those kinds of things are concerned. Remember, your children chose you as their parents. And so they have an idea what they're getting into. Another one was people said, I don't think I like working with puppets. If you don't like working with puppets, don't work with puppets. Or wait a while and try it again. For some people, having puppets or something to hold in their hand is a real confidence builder. For others, it's just a distraction and makes you forget the story because you're so busy moving puppets around. So, that's okay. There's a pattern to these stories. Usually things come in threes. The Rumpelstiltskin comes 3 times to spin the hay or the straw into gold. The wolf comes 3 times to the door, and that's helpful to remember that things usually come in threes in these stories. And it probably has to do something with the three aspects of the human being on some level. So that's helpful for telling stories. Let's see, what were some of the other questions? Oh, somebody asked me about the Norse myths. They're 4th grade. And they are difficult stories. That when they went around, they came back. Nobody wanted to tell them. And part of the reason these stories are hard to tell is because there are so many characters with strange names that are hard to pronounce, and it's okay if you're homeschooling 3 children and you have 3 stories to tell. That means you probably have 6 stories to tell a week, that you read the Norse myths to your 4th grader and not feel really badly about it. Or once in a while pick one of the stories that isn't so hard and tell that one. But don't feel that you have to tell every Norse myth to your child throughout that whole main lesson block if it's really hard for you. There's no use of you, burning the candle at both ends so that you're tired and cranky when you're homeschooling your child in order to tell them a story that could be read. So give yourself a break and occasionally read a story if it's too tough to remember. Another thing, I noticed that most of you did really well with this story, but you had trouble with the little rhyme that you had to remember in the middle of the story. You can write it on a little piece of paper, or you can write it on your hand. And then it's not a piece of paper between you and the child. If it's a little short rhyme, you can write it on a small piece of paper or on your hand, and then you'll have it there. Chances are you'll remember it anyway, but you have the confidence that it's here if you need it. You just have to open your hand. So that can be helpful too. In my reading book, there are quite a few stories in here for 1st and 2nd grade and illustrations to go with them. And a list of stories and symbols for teaching the alphabet to 1st graders. So that might be something that would be helpful to you. Were there other questions about the storytelling that you'd like me to answer? Yes, Michelle.
Thank you. I wondered about, there's so many stories, there's so many of them, and like you said, you can only do so many with your family, especially the ones that I can't read all the stories and get a meaning from all of them. Is there somewhere central location where, that story talks about a liar and that story talks about, meanings behind the stories? Is somewhere that's sort of got a very basic outline of each?
I don't know of any that have a basic outline of each, but there are a couple of books that are really helpful. One is the one I mentioned, May's book, The Cry for Myth.
And what's his name? What's the author's name?
Rollo May.
M-A-Y.
M-A-Y.
M-A-Y, yeah.
Steiner wrote a book, it's called, help me David, The Meaning of Fairy Tales. The Meaning of Fairy Tales, the one that Steiner wrote, is that what it's called?
Yes, but unfortunately it's out of print.
That's out of print.
I think I've got one back at Mawillimbar, but it's out of print.
Yeah.
The nearest thing, I'll work it out. There is a book which has replaced it largely.
Oh, there is? Great. Okay, so get in touch with David for that one. There's another one by Bruno Bettelheim, who's not an anthroposophist, but it's a very interesting book on how to look at fairy tales and understand them.
It's a very good book.
I think it's called The Meaning of Fairy Tale. There's something very similar.
And there's also a wonderful book produced by Flores Press called The Wisdom of Fairy Tales.
Oh,
and
right.
that's really wonderful. Costs about $35. It's quite a thick book, and that's readily available. I've got plenty of them.
Yeah. Okay, so those are 4 sources.
There's also, the Mount Barker Waldorf School has got a list, you know that Grimm's book? They've got a list of the acceptable stories.